how to become more engaged in making a difference in the world in a practical way. And I found this model, when I was thinking about this, I found this model of the active bystander, which I think is really, really helpful. I was thinking about racism at the time. And one of the problems with challenging people about racist thoughts and racist behaviors is people don't want to be challenged. But if you say to them, oh, we'll teach you how to intervene, how to be a good Samaritan, how to be a good person, if you hear something like this going on, then people can be interested. So, for example, they teach it in schools with boys in schools, rather than talking to boys in school and saying, you know, be nice to the girls. They say, hey, if you see sexist behavior or harassment taking place, this is what you can do, which I think it's such a great, great reframe. And then, of course, in that process, people then start to look at their own attitudes and beliefs. So I think it's a really great way of engaging people. And I find it really helpful to myself. I'm actually quite naturally quite an active bystander, but I found that this model was quite helpful in thinking about the range of possibilities and the range of behaviors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the model to you, have a bit of a conversation about it. Then we will have a meditation, which is about your own psychological resources, accessing your psychological resources to help you be more powerful as an active bystander. And then we'll have a conversation in small groups about what we might do in the future. And it's one of the slightly difficult topics, which we're not going to spend a lot of time in, but I certainly have regrets in the past about times when I haven't been an active bystander. I think that's one thing, one of my motivations to be a better active bystander is, it could just be what seems like an innocent sexist comment that someone makes. And how can one, not out of politeness, not, part of the reason for not saying anything can be politeness, but actually to say politely, hey, actually, I'm not really comfortable with that, or just to pull a face or something of that sort. And there are all sorts of situations that we'll come into where it's very easy to let things slip. For example, I've got a male friend who makes quite sexist comments when we're just alone. And I can I've played along in the past, it's like, we're alone, there's no woman present, what harm is there? But actually it normalizes it, doesn't it? It makes it, if it's okay with me, maybe it's okay with someone else, maybe it's okay with someone else, maybe it's okay with someone else. And so actually saying to that person, actually, we just need to train ourselves not to talk like this. This isn't an okay way to talk. We may think it's funny, but but there may be people who don't really get that it's funny. Men talking about sexist stuff, who think it's true, or we may think it's okay to make jokes to women. One of the things we'll talk about is how what seems like a funny joke, may not be a funny joke to the other person, to the other party. And one of the things that I'll also talk about is that sexism towards men is really, from women, is really different to sexism towards women from men. And so is true for racism. A Black person being racist to me may be unpleasant, but I'll probably shake it off pretty quickly because I don't experience racism very much. But if you've had the drip, drip, drip of racist comments, microaggressions over all the years, then what could be a trivial comment can be really painful and hurtful. So racism against white people is really different to racism against Black people, and so is sexism towards men. I mean, I don't like it if, some of the, the new generations of feminists are fighting back, and I'm a bad guy. I don't like it when I get pigeonholed as a white male, upper class male, and and I'm been getting a bit of stereotyping around that, but it's not really affecting the core of who I am. Whereas someone who's had the drip, drip, drip of sexist comments from their father for many, through their childhood, for example, can really be undermined, and it can really touch an undermining wound. So we're going to come to all of that. So I'm just going to take you through the model. Do interrupt at any point, unmute yourselves and ask questions if you want to. Just remember to mute yourselves again afterwards, because because sometimes people aren't aware of the rustling sounds they make in the background. So I'm going to screen share the slides. If I can. So the bystander effect. So the more people who witness an act of a microaggression, or an act of prejudice or discrimination or harassment or public violence, the less they feel personally responsible for doing something about it. This affects all of us, And so there are two reasons for that. The first is diffusion of responsibility, which is that I sort of think, well, there are lots of people here. Why am I responsible? Surely someone else will do something. Somebody else has called the police. Someone else has done X, Y, and Z. So the more people, the less likely we are. And the second one, and of course these two tie up with each other, which is that in the second one, we look to our peer group. It's a natural human thing to look to the people around us to decide how we behave. So if somebody makes it, what seems like a small or nearly innocent, minor remark, and nobody else seems to react, we think, well, maybe we don't need to. Maybe the other person will just brush it off. And so those are two of the reasons for not standing up and acting. And there's some really awful research around this. There was, I don't even want to go into it, but there was a woman who was raped for half an hour and killed outside an apartment block. Some people heard what was going on. Some people saw some of what was going on. Unfortunately, one of the newspapers exaggerated the number of bystanders, but there still were quite a large number of bystanders. And when researchers went afterwards, they found out that people said, well, I didn't really feel it was my place, or maybe it was a couple having a fight, or someone said, I don't want to call the police, but will you call the police? In the end, someone did call the police. But there are quite a lot of examples of people not doing anything when something's happening, either, discrimination or prejudice in social situations or work situations, or violence on the streets. And so I just want to give you this definition, which I think is really helpful, which is to think about everyday microaggressions, which are commonplace, daily, verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostility, hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes to stigmatized or cultural marginalized groups. And of course, we can include gay people, we can include trans people, any group that feels marginalized. And so those are little things that you might even let pass because you don't think are so big, but when you add them all up, they become a lot. And of course, again, stereotype, thinking that someone from a culture is going to be a particular way. And again, when you come from a culture that is sort of dominant, like the British or the English, if someone makes a bit of a joke about the English being so polite or not being in touch with feelings, it might annoy me a bit, but it doesn't affect me deeply. But of course, if you make those sort of comments to a Jewish person or a black person, or to a woman, or an Iranian, then it may actually really touch a wound, but a wound where they've already been undermined or stereotyped. And the same thing is true about jokes. My rule about jokes is, Jews can make jokes about Jews, Catholics can make jokes about the Pope, Irish can make jokes about the Irish, English can make jokes about the English. You can make a joke about your own, your own ethnic group. But you can't make jokes about other people's groups because, it may be offensive to them. So active bystander training, the original active bystander training took place in New York because of an incident of harassment on the subway. And someone actually took a picture of this guy masturbating on the subway. And only when the picture went viral did the police do anything about it. They weren't willing to do anything about it until the picture had gone viral. And so a group of young people decided to set up training about, what bystanders. And then that it started as a small organization. It became quite a big organization. At first, they started with harassment on the public transport system. Then they, supported Black Lives Matter. Then during the COVID crisis, there was quite a lot of harassment of Chinese people. Americans said, oh, it all came from China, under Donald Trump. So they did a lot of training, and now in universities, they teach the active bystander training in America, particularly around if you witness sexual harassment, to do something about it. And the thing I like about the model is that it can be used all the way from microaggressions to sort of, harassment to violence. It can be used right across that spectrum. And we'll just explore all of those. Really, I've divided it more into two categories: the everyday slights that you could get in the office or in a social situation, right through to the more serious harassment and violent end of the spectrum. We're going to talk about both. So these are the 5 Ds of active bystander training. The first is, so a microaggression: somebody says something racist or sexist in the office. The boss says to the only woman in the room, will you make the tea? Something could be quite subtle in a way. You can say, hey, I'm not sure that's okay. Maybe I'll go and make the tea, you could say, as the guy. Or somebody says something sexist or racist, and you can say, actually, that's not okay. That's sexist or racist or this or that, or even just, I'm really slightly uncomfortable with that remark. I'm not happy with it. So that's a sort of direct type of intervention when you feel safe enough. And hopefully in social, your own family or social situations, you feel reasonably safe. And hopefully in many work situations, you will feel safe, unless, of course, it's the boss doing the microaggression type of stuff. And some organizations will have better HR systems than others. So, if you can, you intervene directly. You say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with that. That's ... If you're not completely comfortable, you can delegate. You can say to someone else, hey, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about this. How do you feel? Or might you do something about it? Or, would you be willing to come to HR with me? Or, let's go and talk to this person who's just been slighted, or let's stand up for them. Or so you can involve other people in supporting the victim, in the situation. And we'll come to it. This is going to be very important when we come to, violence on the streets and places like that. But again, you're not on your own. One of the tricks here is to talk directly to the person and say their name. What happens, part of the bystander effect is a sort of freeze. People freeze. But if you directly involve them by saying their name or even pointing at them very directly, in some situations, if they're really frozen and you talk to them directly, you need to actually tell them precisely what to do, and then they'll go and do it. Again, in a situation, perhaps less so in the less harassment, violent end of the spectrum, but you can always distract. You could always go and put yourself between, the perpetrator and the victim, and start, go to the victim and say, hey, how are you doing? It's so nice to see you. Or, you can do that, or you can go and talk to the perpetrator and change the subject, or you can stop a fight that way. In the personal situations, if we can, let's be direct rather than distract. But sometimes we may just need to distract, to say, to go and, ask the perpetrator, you're at a wedding, the father-in-law says something dodgy, you go to the father-in-law and you ask him about his golf or whatever. How do you defuse the situation? And then sometimes things happen really quickly and you don't have a chance to intervene. There's a delay, and then you can go and talk to the person afterwards. So even if you miss a chance of intervening at the time, you can go and talk to them afterwards. And that can be really helpful. One of the features of trauma is that people, one of the things that, what's the difference between two people who have a bad experience and one is traumatized and one isn't? One of the factors is that you have a chance to process your feelings. So just going and listening to someone and asking them how they feel and giving them some quality attention can help reduce the impact of the situation for them. And then the final D is document. You know, in a business situation, you may want to write it down for HR or even for, you know, constructive dismissal. And in police situations, you may want to write it down for evidence in court. So there are situations in which you might want to document what took place. So then let's just talk about the harassment or violence. And here I'm thinking particularly about stuff on the street, you know, or stuff on the tube. And so I've changed the order slightly of the Ds, because you may be able, you know, if you're a man, you may be, you know, and you know, or if you're, actually that's a sexist comment, but if you're a big, strong person, let's put it that way, you may be able to intervene. And in fact, I know some women who are quite good at intervening in physical fight type of situations because they, you know, they don't think they're going to be hit, you know, or they feel confident about it. So, but you may, you know, if you can intervene directly, but if you're frightened for your own safety, one of the best techniques is to distract. So to go and sit with the person who's being harassed, or talk to the person who's being harassed, or if, you know, if it's a sort of drunk who's the perpetrator, perhaps go and engage with them or talk to them or do something. So is there some way that you can get into it without dealing with whatever's going on directly, that diffuses the situation? You know, harassment might be in a good example where someone's getting a bit too close to another person, and you can just distract them and diffuse the whole thing. And then you might ask other people to help. You might say, hey, can someone call the police? Could you call the police? Being very direct. Or come with me, please, right now, let's go closer. Or let's go, and you go and talk to the, you know, the person, this person, I'll go and talk to that person. So how can you get other people involved in a way that that sort of solves the problem? And then direct is still there, but I've just put it slightly lower down the list, because, you know, you can only be direct if you feel safe enough to do it. And then of course there's delay and document again. Obviously in a public situation, you might, you know, write notes if you think there's going to be a police case. Another way of documenting is with you know, a phone, making a video. I do that when I see police arresting Black people, for example, or at climate marches where the police are being a bit rough with someone, and I'll get my phone out. And then I might shout things like, I think you're being a bit rough with this person, you know. And I don't usually do anything much with the video, but just the fact that I've got the video out, you know, is often enough for people to manage their behaviour. And it's quite surprising with police. Most of them nowadays have cameras on their kit. And if they're videoing you, you can get your phone out and video them back, just because you want to make sure that everybody's behaving correctly. I've seen situations where police have tried to get information out of people that they're not legally required, you know, that the person isn't legally required to give, but people are just intimidated by the police. So, and let me just say that by and large, my interactions with police are great, but then I'm not from an ethnic minority. I'm reasonably self-confident, and I sort of know what the rules are. But I have seen police messing around with people. You know, I saw that the other day, a policeman intimidating a young man at a demonstration, just with his words, not physically. So document is one of the things that we can do. Any questions at this point? It's pretty clear and obvious, isn't it? Any questions or comments? I think just saying that the most important thing is to say, if not me, who? You know, it's like, if I don't do it, who will do it? If you see something happening on the street, who's going to call the police? Well, if maybe 3 people have called the police, but let me be one of those 3 people, for example. Yeah, questions, comments? Georgiana and Caroline, and then Georgiana.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to just ask you your thoughts around the thing about, you know, if you're noticing something going on, your intervention being from your own feelings or your own experience, as in, I find this, I am feeling like this, as opposed to you are doing that, you know, and that whole kind of differential between, you know, not turning it into an accusation, which potentially only
it's really
makes the situation more. And I think that's quite an important distinction, isn't it?
I find this sexist. I find this racist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. Georgiana.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, particularly, I live in an area where there's quite a lot of Black people, and I see quite a lot of harassment, and I do get my phone out and I video. I have a problem. I mean, it's slightly separate from this. Well, maybe it's not. I don't know. But about humour, because to me, nothing is really out of. I mean, that's what humour is. I mean, I was quite shocked. Ricky Gervais, I saw, and he was actually making jokes about disabled kids. He was making jokes about a lot of other things that I thought was, wow, you know. But when it got to the disabled 2-year-olds sort of kicking that, you know, then I did get, you know, that's like that. But I mean, it's kind of not what we're talking about.
I don't quite know what the boundary is. I don't quite know what the boundary is, because I do think that if you go to a stand-up comedy club,
yeah,
and then you're sort of expecting to get some pretty dodgy jokes.
Yeah.
So I sort of think, you know, you're going to get what you expect. I know that in the old days there were stand-up comedians where it was just one joke after another about women and women's bodies, and I think that probably was, you know, that was too much. So probably a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's much more funny when it's the Islamic comedian who makes a joke about Islamic people. It's much more funny when the woman makes the joke about women. So I think it is a slightly different context in a comedy club type of situation.
Yes. Oh, I will, you know, just make jokes with friends, you know, that I wouldn't make with I don't know. I mean, anyway.
I think it's a different. Your close friends, your friend may just say, you know, don't be so, you know, you git, and sort of. But even then, I think just to be careful. And what sort of jokes do you make, Georgia?
God, you know, thank God people can't hear us. You know, because it's not what we feel. It's just like being outrageous. In some sense, I don't know. I mean, Monty Python would be banned now. I'm just slightly wary of being too woke when it comes to humor.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
I totally disagree.
Okay, great. Andrew, go on.
I did stand up on the comedy circuit in the 90s when it transformed from the sort of humor we were used to, which was the Bernard Mannings, the Jim Davidson, Love Their Neighbor. But you see, you're now saying what is funny or not, whereas before you said anything is funny. It's not, you see, and that comedy circuit began because there were a group of people that didn't want to tell sexist, racist jokes. Therefore, the rules of that circuit were, when it began in, it was about 85 at the Comedy Store, and then spread out to a lot of the comedy, that we will not tell sexist, racist jokes that are at the expense of someone else.
Yeah.
And what we do sometimes when we're in private, that can leak out because there's no one else around hearing, just our friends. So my yardstick is, you know, is this joke kind? Would I tell it in front of that person? And if I wouldn't, then my joke is the expense of someone else, and I'm reinforcing stereotypes and tropes.
Well done. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So and if you want to, there's someone that gives a really great treatise on this in his stand-up, is the late George Carlin, who again does say you can tell a joke about anything, and it's about context and intention.
Yeah.
So what that intention is when you're telling the joke, if you're really honest with yourself, what is my intention in telling this joke?
Absolutely. And I've heard some jokes that are on topics that would just be horrific. But where, you know, actually, I mean, there was someone on the Radio 4 who told a joke about the Holocaust, but it was not anti-Semitic, and it was basically a bit, I think it was a bit anti-God, actually, more than anti-Semitic. And actually it was an acceptable joke. But the radio presenter was absolutely crapping themselves when this person said he was going to tell a Holocaust joke,
Yeah.
But it's not, as you say, it's not against the person. And it's, say it again, Andrew. You said
it's about the intention. Well, why am I telling this joke?
Yeah.
And the context. So there was a huge gap before you could tell jokes about 9/11, for instance. And it's still, you still really can't. The Holocaust is like that far away, where very clever comedians can get away if it's the right context and there's the right intention there. In other words, I'm telling it to illustrate a point.
And actually, I would say that's one to avoid.
Yeah. But there are no jokes about Rwanda.
Yeah.
It's still too near. It depends who the joke is against.
Yeah.
Who it's for. So
I think you think about leaking. You talked about leaking out. Some people, there may be someone in the group who thinks, oh, well, this sort of joke is okay. So I agree with you also, but I don't want it to be the world to be so correct. I know a friend of mine who worked in America, and when they went down the pub, they could F and blind, but the Americans wouldn't do it. It all had to be like office type of behavior. And so I think a little bit of, room to be outrageous is good, but just
I completely agree. Yeah. And in fact, George Carlin has a whole nother routine about the 5 words you can't say on American TV and how ridiculous it is. You can't say certain words, that words are offensive.
Yeah.
It's really worth checking out on those topics.
Great. Well, will I find that on YouTube or something?
Anyway, yeah. Anyway.
Fantastic. Great. Good. Any other questions or comments on the presentation I've done so far? And how you might apply it yourself? Marion, you're unmuted. You're muted, Marion. You have to unmute yourself. Maybe I can unmute you.
Sorry, it's an upgraded Zoom. I've just found it. Apologies for that. What I'm wondering is, we've been focusing reasonably on how you get yourself into the conversation to diffuse or distract.
Yeah.
How can you tell really when it's safe to walk away to make sure that you have actually made a difference?
It really depends so much on the situation. You might, in many situations, I mean, I will stay with the person who's the inverted commas, the victim, until the two sides are separated. For example, a black mother and her daughter on the street being harassed by a drunk guy. I walked with them until they were out of the neighborhood. So it does depend on, the type of situation. Another occasion, there was go on.
So I just think the one that I was thinking about was one I saw recently of a young couple where the male was actually being quite emotionally abusive in conversation.
Yeah.
And it was a private conversation that I really did want to break up in some way. And they just sort of walked away before I could gather myself to do anything at all. But if I had, I could see that conversation continuing in the future. There wouldn't actually, I could interrupt that instance, but I couldn't actually help longer term.
It's a bit hypothetical, so we don't know. But sometimes, I was in a situation recently where I'm just trying to remember what I said. Where a kid was just going on and on and on and on and on at the mother to try and get their way. And I just turned to the kid. It was a terrible intervention, but I turned to the kid and said, "Your mother's such a pushover, isn't she?" And both of them were absolutely livid with me. But it did change their interaction after that.
Right.
And she started standing up for her boundaries a bit more. So sometimes if you point out what's going on, have you noticed that you're using abusive language with your partner? Is this something you do all the time? I mean, they may tell you to fuck off and they both leave. But after that, both of them are a little bit more aware, hopefully. But you can't save people, unless they want to be saved.
Situation. in a situation like that, it's important that other party knows that someone stood up for her.
Yeah.
So that someone just wasn't standing by and letting it happen. And just sometimes the fact you intervened can be enough for that person that actually it's not just me.
Yeah.
Someone else thought that as well.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Brilliant. That's really great. Thank you, Andrew.
Julian, you haven't really talked about mentally disturbed people. But I think we get quite a lot of them around here as well, in the streets, and different ways of interacting with them. I came across one at a funeral the other week who was kind of disturbing everybody. In the end, I mean, I noticed that she was going like that a lot at the coffin. I don't think she knew the person, but so finally I went up to her and people were trying to stop her, but nothing seemed to work. Yeah, I went up to her and I just did that, sort of imitating what she did, and it got her quiet for a bit. But I mean, I don't find it easy, you know, on the street.
I think it's a different type of situation. You know, it's so hard sometimes to be kind with somebody who's being very disruptive, who's mentally ill. It's really a challenge. And I can't say that I'm always good at it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it just happened I was that time. I'm not usually.
Yeah.
But...
So I can't really, I mean, there's sort of some balance between kindness and perhaps distraction. I don't know. Do you have a view on this, Andrew? You're muted. Yeah, great.
I'm unmuting myself. It's very difficult because it's hard. I've been in exact situations before at funerals or weddings or even just workshops. And yeah. all you can do is find a time to just go up and just check in. Is everything okay? And sometimes guide them away in public situations. Let's come and have a chat, just to take it away from what's going on, because you can't. You know, I've got my first cousin is schizophrenic, and it can be very trying sometimes to get him out of a loop of his consciousness and comments about the world. So sometimes you just have to understand that, unfortunately, that is the illness.
D for distract. You know, can you go and engage with the person? You know, really empathize with them, connect with them, so that they're then having a conversation with you. Maybe then you missed the funeral, but everybody else has had, you know, a better time to do it. So, yeah. Caroline.
I just feel a little bit concerned about a possible situation, say, where the example we had earlier of a couple having an argument, and then one felt compelled to interfere because someone was using, you know, abusive language or whatever it was, and the potential danger that the interference actually only causes a far greater escalation once they've left the scene and are in private, and that potentially someone having commented on it makes makes it possible for the other person to then really accuse the other. Look what you've done, no, and actually that one inadvertently escalates a situation. And similarly, actually, with the the mental illness thing, it's like that kind of very careful approach that's very sort of grounded and kind and gentle. I don't know, it's complicated.
It is complicated. I think that's a good answer. My answer is,
I just wanted to bring in that it's complicated, it's nuanced, it's not always necessarily the right thing to, I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm just saying, I feel like I don't, you know, it's hard to know. It's hard to know. That's what I wanted to bring in. Really.
Absolutely. It can be hard to know. Yeah. Anything else? Any other comments or questions?
I have heard something, and it actually worked, that if you're in danger, rather than shouting help, you shout fire. So if you see somebody in danger, you know, or something like that, or, you know, something's escalating, people do tend to respond more to shouting fire than shouting help.
I wonder what the evidence is for this approach, you know.
Well, I have actually done it myself.
Yeah.
Sorry,
But
my phone was on, sorry.
But yeah, anyway, so I'm not sure. Perhaps it does work. I mean, I'm sure you could shout, you know, lots of things, but I don't know if there's any evidence to support that. That's all I can say. I'm not.
Well, I think people respond immediately to fire.
Right.
Was help. They might just listen.
It's funny because I've done a lot of time in businesses. Whenever you hear the fire alarm going, you just continue business as normal.
Yeah, but that's not somebody shouting fire.
No, it's true. Maybe that would work. Maybe that would work.
I mean, I was being attacked in the street once when I did that, and people came out.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that.
Well,
okay. Anything else before we do? What I want to do is I want to do a meditation on what sort of psychological resources would support you being an active bystander and staying safe, because I think we need to take care of our own safety as well. You know, what sort of inner resources can you call on that will help you be, you know, empowered and safe? And I think, let me just look around. Marion, you have an NLP background, so you probably know about, you know, psychological. Andrew, you know what I mean by, you know, so, you know, either people or saints or characters from storybooks, or, you know, people from films, you know, who would, you know, would it be, you know, Galadriel, or, you know, from Lord of the Rings, or would it be, you know, who would be the person that you would call on to support you? And there, so, you know, there are people, you know, so could you imagine a warrior friend of yours who would just help you deal with the situation? Or could you imagine, you know, some figure that you really admire who would help you in this situation? You know, Martin Luther King, I could imagine Martin Luther King walking across the bridge. You know, or is it some spiritual figure that you call on? Or is it, you know, are you very old-fashioned English and you have to call on Winston Churchill? You know, who would be your hero that you would wish to emulate in that situation, that wouldn't escalate too much, but also, you know, find the right level of addressing the situation. Also, you know, higher power can be helpful. Actually, I'm doing this for a higher power, and I call on the protection of a higher power. I find very, very helpful for me. So anyone else want to suggest, because before I do the meditation, anyone want to suggest any types of inner resource that you would call on that would be interesting for other people to hear about? Mm-hmm. Actually, another one is a time when you did stand up and it was accepted, you know, it worked. I once, there was a road rage incident. I got out of my car. There was someone punching someone else through the window, and I went up and shouted at him. I said, you were at fault, get back in your car. And he looked at me and got back in his car. So I could call on that, you know. Anything that you want to mention that's interesting, that might be interesting to others, that you would call on?
I was taking my dad to get his dialysis at the hospital a few weeks ago, and a woman stormed in to the corridor shouting, to the nurse, where's cardiology? Where's cardiology? Where's cardiology? The nurse, I don't know, this is the renal unit. She said, well, you should know. And I was watching all of this, and I just stood up gently and said, excuse me, but if you go back to reception, they'll help you. And she kind of tottled off, and the nurse just went, thank you. Just because someone stood, you know, again, saw it again. I kind of, but if I have to, you know, if I have to do my NLP bit and conjure up, it's always the Terminator.
Yeah.
I go big. You know, someone's not taking shit from anybody.
One of the interesting things is that it can work both ways, because I know, I know Andrew's a big guy, you know, I'm quite a big guy. So therefore, in situations, you know, I'm less intimidated. But I also know small people who, because, you know, small women who can go in those situations because they feel confident, because they feel less likely to be attacked. And actually, in some of the rough nightclubs, they hire female bouncers because drunk men are less likely to punch a woman than they are a man, you know. So a lot of it is actually, I mean, anyone who's had any training in martial arts, you'll sort of know it's a lot to do with how confident you are on the inside, you know, how you feel. If you look like you can be intimidated, you probably will get intimidated. So you sort of have to follow your own heart on it. But if you could, you know, what feels safe to me? Because if you're coming from a place of your own safety, everything is likely to be, you know, to work better. They're less likely to do anything. You're less likely to either escalate or, you know, you're going to be better at de-escalating, actually, be the way to say it.
That's what I was going to just sort of bring in. Yeah, it was a bit like what Andrew was saying, but that thing of coming from a place of kind of centeredness and sort of gentleness within myself,
yes,
as opposed to reactiveness.
Yes,
to kind of try and find that. And even if it is actually what's needed is a strong intervention of some sort, is to find it from that place,
yes,
as opposed to sort of to kind of allow rage and kind of anger to come up, but from a grounded place and a centered place. If that kind of response is required.
absolutely. I mean, in the you know, Just Stop Oil, when they block off the roads, they have people there called de-escalators, so who are not the ones sitting in the road. People jump out of their cars in absolute rage and want to beat them up. And the de-escalators basically keep calm and do reflective listening. That's basically what they do. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah. Okay, anything else before the meditation? Okay. Yeah, go on, Maggie.
I got cut off totally from Zoom. So while I was out there, what I was thinking of was, I just listened to the direct, the delegate, the distract, and I thought with all of those, it's even if I do nothing, it's to reflect on the situation and to think what I could have done so the next time I am better prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think the final step of delay is afterwards, could you call the person, visit the person, you know.
Even if I've not been able to do anything because I've frozen, then I think it's to reflect on it and think, what could I have done?
Absolutely.
Not even to do anything, but just to think, what could I have done?
Well, that's
so
really
next
the purpose.
time it happens.
That's the purpose of this session, because I think we've probably all got examples of what places where we could have intervened. But I just want, you know, so that's great. What could I do next time? And just going back that step, I just want to remind us, hey, you're back, Georgianne. Just to remind us that actually calling the person afterwards or making contact with them afterwards is really helpful, even if you can't do anything at the time. And sometimes I had a conversation with a black guy who was a very senior person in a international bank, and he was telling me about how he'd got made redundant. And afterwards I thought, I never said to him, do you think there was racism going on? I never said it. I was one of those, you know, quiet white people who don't ask the difficult questions. So I just contacted him and I just said, hey, I think I should have asked you if there was racism going on. He said, no, I don't think there was racism going on. But he was happy that I'd asked him the question. So I think, you know, follow-up is really helpful. Then people don't feel alone. And I suspect he must have asked himself the question. So, yeah. Okay, Andrew, if you're here, we prefer it. This is Andrew Stewart, sorry. We prefer it if people have their cameras on, if you can do that. At least you could unmute and tell us why you haven't got your camera on, because we try to create more intimate, connected environment with each other. So, Andrew, fantastic. Thank you.
Hey, how you doing, Julian? How you?
Good. Great to have you here. So, great. Thanks for turning your camera on. It's great to have you here. We're going to do a meditation right now on our psychological resources that will support us being active bystanders. So let's do that. So make yourself comfortable, feel your body, get into a physical position that supports your body so that you can just let the chair or the location support you. Put your hands or arms in a place that is comfortable. And just pay attention to 3 parts of the body. One part of the body is your skin. How much of your skin could you hold in awareness in this moment? How much of your skin can you pay attention to? It's the biggest organ of the body. It's almost impossible to be aware of all of your skin at the same time, but it's fun to try. And then all of the muscles that hold your bones. I don't think we can actually feel our bones, but we can feel the muscle, the pressure of the bones on the muscles. I think that's how it works. And then, of course, the muscles pressing against the skin. So it can be great to just feel the big muscles to start with. The thighs, the backside, the muscles in the back, the shoulders, the arms, the neck. Those are strong muscles. Holding the head, the lower leg, the feet. And then the smaller muscles, like the scalp or the facial muscles. And then there's the muscles in the belly that hold all the viscera in. Of course, there's the pelvic floor, the psoas, the abdominal muscles. And when we pay attention, of course, to the belly, we start to come into the third area of the body, which is, of course, emotional sensation, places in the body that feel emotion. The belly, the sex, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat. And then, so that's all of our feeling senses. And then with our ears, I like to listen. Can I hear sound outside the house? Can I hear sound inside the house? What sound have I got in this room? What can I hear in my body? I can hear my breathing. Can I hear my heart? Probably only if it's really quiet. And also the internal dialogue. Am I talking to myself? What are my words? Listening to the internal dialogue from a distance. So what is that voice saying? What's the tone of voice? Just being curious, being kind, listening from a distance. So because I can hear outside the house, because I can hear sounds in the house, because I can listen in this room, because I can hear in my body, I'm obviously much, much more than that inner voice. That's only a part of me. And then most of you have your eyes closed, but whether it's with the optical eye or with the mind's eye, you can notice what you see. What do you see in your mind's eye? Even if your eyes are closed, you would be able to see the darkness of your eyelids and perhaps light on your eyelids. And if your eyes are open, you can stare at a point, look at a point, and then defocus your eyes so that you are engaging peripheral vision. And so when we think about in some social situation or some work situation, which is reasonably safe, where somebody says something that's discriminating or prejudicial, prejudice in some way, what inner support, what resources would we want to come to mind? Who would support us in gently, calmly speaking out, but firmly speaking out? Is it the memory of previous times we've done that? Or is there someone we know, some friend or colleague who would do it really well and who could support us in our inner world? Or a character from a storybook? Or a famous figure, a political figure? If I was confronted with racism, I might ask Martin Luther King, because he would say something with kindness. Or some spiritual figure might be supportive. Support you in standing up and being counted in that situation. Mature in your maturity, in your wisdom, in your compassion, and also in your firmness, in your strength. The peaceful warrior. In the martial art Aikido, there's a saying in Japanese that I don't remember, which is about being strong so I can be at peace with the world. To be a warrior so I can be at peace with the world. So what is the quality that you'd want to bring in a social or a work situation when you heard something that just needed to be challenged or pointed out or called out? And as you're imagining this resource, this person or this being or this memory that will support you, perhaps you could just imagine an imaginary situation where you hear something, where in your life might you hear something that wasn't quite okay? And what might you say, empowered with this resource? What might be something, a situation where in the past you might have not spoken up, but actually in the future you want to speak up? Again, as you're imagining possible future situations, what's behavior that you very quietly but determinedly don't want to tolerate in your social or your work circle in the future? And how can you deal with it? It may be different if it's a friend or a colleague or a peer than if it's the grandfather or the father-in-law or the mother-in-law. And sometimes the tool is humor. Maybe you put it back on the other person. Just imagining what you might say. Or even the facial expression you might pull if it's in your family. Being the change you want in the world, being the person you want to be in the world, are there any other resources you want to call on? One of my resources is the moment at which Nelson Mandela is sent to prison for 27 years. Because that's a moment where he really needed resilience. And he decided to be proactive and learn about the Afrikaner by talking to the prison guards. That sort of courage, that conviction, walking his path. I want more of that. Being the change I want in the world. For me to be the change I want in the world. What inner resources do I need? I find those sorts of figures really helpful. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. The suffragettes in England, Emily Pankhurst. Greta Thunberg. And also my spiritual resources, the spiritual powers that I serve. If you're lucky enough to serve a spiritual power, then you can call on that. It could be Mother Earth. And then let's think about what we would do if we see violence or harassment in public spaces. What resources do we need to face that? Perhaps it's the same. Perhaps we need something else. For me, all of the same are there, and also some peaceful warriors. Could be a superhero from a Marvel comic. Could be a female warrior that you admire. And also, is there some spiritual power that supports you? Some spiritual power that helps you keep your character, even in a very difficult situation. But also, there's some wisdom in there as well. Maybe the best thing to do is to stand back and call the police, or shout at other bystanders and direct other bystanders. Engage a group of people. Maybe the best thing to do is to play the fool, to go and say to one or the other, "Hey, didn't I meet you on holiday last summer?" So maybe there is some of the magician resource. What would Gandalf do, or Galadriel? Channel some Gandalf and Galadriel. Or one of the powerful women from the Old Testament. I'm reminded, just come to mind from my unconscious, of a photograph of a girl somewhere in Asia in front of a line of policemen with helmets and batons, offering a flower to one of the policemen. There's a quality of steadfastness that I'm feeling, of determination, of groundedness. I wonder how you can have more of that, if you need more of that. So being this change that you want in the world, imagine some situations that you might encounter where you want to be this person. You're just rehearsing through in your mind what you might do if this sort of thing occurs in your future. And then when you're ready, just staying deeply connected with yourself, but returning to the group, returning to the screen. So what I want to do is I'm going to have us go into groups of 4, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes per person, 20 minutes in total. Each person gets 5 minutes to talk about the 2 types of scenario, the scenarios of microaggression or prejudice that you might encounter in the future, and how you might act in that situation and what your resources might be. So how you might act and what your resources might be in a discrimination or prejudice type of situation, a microaggression situation. And then also, because you've only got 5 minutes, so 2.5 minutes on that and 2.5 minutes on in a situation where you might be a bystander, an observer, or a witness to violence or harassment, how you might act and what your internal resources might be. I will do the timing, so I will let you know 5 minutes per person, 20 minutes in total, groups of 4, starting now. Welcome back, everyone. Hi, Marion. So how was that conversation? How was that for you? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first because no one's speaking.
Great, fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to hear different points of view and different experiences and how different people cope and feel. And because you can't take it for granted. Well, I don't want to take it for granted that what I feel everyone else feels, because it's just not true. So it's good to hear just from other people, 3 different points, differing opinions and views and coping mechanisms and ways of dealing with becoming from a bystander to an active bystander.
Great. And is there anything that you learned or you got today that you'll do more of, or you hope to do more of in the future?
I think it's just preparing yourself beforehand.
Yeah.
One thing I did was just taking just a moment to actually think before you speak. Maybe just a moment more.
Yeah. Great.
If I could jump in, Julian, if that's all right.
Go on.
Some fantastic points there. It's about rehearsing that in advance, so that, as Caroline made such a good point, it's about muscle memory and bullies. See, when you can stand and ground yourself and breathe, and your session's been fantastic, but when you can ground yourself and breathe and actually get yourself into your own space, then you become Wonder Woman. And that's what Caroline put forward strongly. And it's about that muscle memory and rehearsing the situation in advance. And I love, and Andrew as well, with comedy. It's like comedy always rocks. And join me at 7 o'clock.
Great. So what else? Who else? Let's hear from everyone if we can. You need to unmute, Georgianne.
Yeah, I agree with the grounding, the necessity for that, just to to pause because I'm so impulsive and sort of impetuous and would just leap in. So I need it in all areas of my life, you know, just the constant, the
To
grounding.
stop you from being impetuous, to just sort of give yourself a moment.
Yes, yes. Although, of course, there are times when you need to be.
Yes.
I mean, you need to leap in and save somebody if they're falling, or you know, you need to be spontaneous. But
Yeah.
you know, there's a difference between, you know, I am spontaneous, but I'm very impetuous.
I think there's something about, you know, even a very, very short pause. You know, that's what my martial arts training was. Just look around me 360 degrees before I leap into action. Thank you. What else have I'd like to hear from everybody. Maggie, did you unmute? I think you did.
I was amazed that I went back to Greenham Common. And
Were you at Greenham Common?
yeah, I went to Greenham Common as a bystander and supported with food and talk the people who were there. So it's not necessarily jumping in, it's actually saying to the people who are being more active, I support you, I honour you. And I began to think about being an older woman and that I have time and I'm interested in becoming involved with people who are homeless and on the streets and just talking to them and giving them valuable time. So that was what I did. But I was in a wonderful all-female group, which got me thinking about the different contributions that women could make. There's some powerful women in our group.
Right, beautiful, good. Just to mention that, you know, I'm doing an active bystander thing there. I'm very supportive of climate change, and some of the people have been arrested in the group that I'm interested in. I'm going to the police station tonight to, you know, to be there as a supporter and a witness for them as they're released. Great. Let's hear who wants to talk next. Caroline.
Yeah, the thing for me, well, one of the things for me was also, especially with the microaggressions, was how important it is to be relational in the way that I communicate, and how different that is. So it's like through our common humanity and recognizing that kind of shared space and keeping it relational. Actually, my sense is that it would be more readily received. And the other thing was, alongside the kind of thing around a muscle memory and kind of practice, it's like, I haven't thought of the person yet, but I want a kind of superpower. And I know exactly what it's like. It's kind of like it's me. And it's like, and it's this woman, and this woman has a sword, and the sword has this capacity to just cut through something with total clarity. And it's like, and there's something around that sort of capacity to kind of go, no, really clear. You know, that is really important, but I think also needs to be kind of practiced, because when the moment comes, you need to have it in you. You need to know where it is within you, you know, in order to be able to produce it. That's my sense for myself, anyway.
This reminds me of the phrase soft power rather than hard power. You know, sometimes if you can do it with soft power, it's still just as effective, and you've still got the relationship with the person. So I think, you know, that's good. I can see Maggie approves, so good. Great. Marion, Christina, Li Wei.
立辉 ，yes， 朱利安，嗨，你说我觉得他今天这个主体让我想到我童年的时候，我的妈妈和我被欺负的时候，我就去找了当地的政府。那时候我9岁的时候。
She says today's lesson make her think about when she was 9 years old. Her mother and her was discriminated, and then she just stood out and went to the local city government.
对，我觉得我有了一份正义感。
And now she feels like there's adjustment. She need to stand
我非常痛恨暴力，
She does not like violence.
但是看到的暴力，有时候我会直接冻结锁结，但是当我反应过来的时候，我会想一些方式去
支持自己。
对，支持自己去反击。
When she sees violence, sometimes she just frozen. She doesn't know what to do. No.
Well, you know, that Li Hui, that's really understandable. You know, I'm not going to say much, but I know that you come from a culture where there was a lot of violence in the 1950s and 1960s. And you probably got trauma. You probably carry. We have to be very kind to ourselves when we've had traumatic experiences, you know, because, you know, we may need some sort of, you know, somatic experiencing or bodywork type of therapy to unfreeze, you know. So that's not surprising. So you have to be kind with yourself. Yeah.
1 second, I translate for her.
Okay.
And 她说你的背景来自50年代、60年代那个时候呢，有很多的这个暴力。
Yes.
那么你呢就要学一些，让你的身体呢不要去冻结到那里。You need to 做一些这一方面的训练。
Yes. Thank you.
Right. And I recommend somatic experiencing for trauma. So, who else wants to? Marion, we haven't heard from you yet. You have to unmute. You have to unmute, Marion. Yeah.
Yes, just finding it.
That's okay. I wish I could have £1 for every time I had to say, please unmute. You know, actually, Maggie would owe me a fortune. But anyway. Great. Go on, Marion.
At least you're not saying, we have some verbal leakage, which I heard on another one, which worried me a little. There's noise coming through from a certain person. I've really liked, again, as Maggie said, the very female feel of the group. And I really liked the point of Maggie's comment about working with the homeless or just dealing with the homeless. And it was striking me that apart from intervening in the microaggression or the harassment that we've been talking about, there's also intervention just as we breathe, to speak to people like the homeless who may be feeling sad or unhappy. So it's another level of what we're talking about. Absolutely. That I hadn't considered. And I thought that was rather wonderful.
Yeah, the invisible.
I'd just say that the person I like to become, as I have just explained to people in my group, it's not somebody wonderful like Mandela. It's Emma Peel from the Avengers. Not the whiz power, just the confidence and the humour that she brings into a situation and copes. So I'm going to be, I hope, coping a lot more, thanks to Emma and thanks to Maggie and the other ladies in my group.
Right. I just want to really acknowledge you around the thing about both of you and Maggie talking about, you know, those people like the street people who are invisible. You know, there was such a simple thing to do, a big issue person who I built a relationship with. And I mean, I'm sure the money I gave him was really helpful, but just chatting to me and talking to each other about our holidays, you know, all of those things, and people in shops. And there are lots of places where we can notice if something's going on for someone, where we can be a positive, you know, a positive force. So yeah, I really like those ones as well. Christina, we haven't heard from you, have we? You're on mute.
Yes, all right. Well, I remembered an event where I was where I felt very strong in a very bad situation, and I managed to go out, keeping calm, breathing. Don't stop thinking. Don't be afraid. Stay orientated. See the other. shock the other and surprise the other person and involve the other person into a conversation. And that changed the situation enormously. And the surprise I did to him, it was really great. And he started to tell me about his life, even he was about to do something very bad. And well, and that gave me hope that in many situations, that the way I can continue and I can go out, keeping calm, don't freeze, don't be afraid, don't stop thinking, see the other, change the perspective, try to see the other person as a person and not as an aggressor.
Yeah.
And well, that's what I got during the meditation.
Great, beautiful. So great to hear that. I was actually, as you were talking, it just reminded me of someone I know who worked for a charity, going to countries where things were quite risky, and the army were quite risky people to be around, and the police were pretty lawless. And one of the things in their security training was actually show them pictures of your kids. You know, talk to them about your family, build a personal connection. People are much less likely to be violent if you create a personal connection with them. I think somehow is this, find it just, if we can create a personal connection, things may de-escalate. So I think that's a sort of useful idea. So thank you so much. I just want to mention that this is actually a part of a two-part workshop, because on the 9th of November, I'm going to talk about applying the active bystander thing to the environment and biodiversity catastrophe, which is happening at the moment. And but I'm going to use a different model for that, because I'm going to use the grief model from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Sorry, I'm just going to mute you. I think it's Christina, because there's background sound going on. Because the worst catastrophe that's ever happened to the world, or at least in human times, is about to happen, is happening. And yet most of us are just going about our day-to-day business. And so isn't that interesting? And most of us actually have the data as well. We know, but because the bystander effect, there's millions of us. Why me? What can I do about it? And also, if nobody's doing anything about it, maybe I don't need to do anything about it. And so the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross process, has denial, and that's the first thing, people just deny it's happening. But we're going to go a lot into what are the feelings of hopelessness that stop us from acting. So that's on the 9th of November, and I'm quite excited about it, because it's about including all the difficult feelings rather than pushing the difficult feelings away. And this is all a part of something that some of you may have heard about, which is the generative citizens movement, that I'm an instigator in starting a movement. There's something called generative change, which has generative coaching, generative chance, generative consulting. And we're starting with people from that movement, but we're broadening it out. And so generative citizen is about, how can I be empowered, open-hearted, with my psychological resources and a positive force in the world. And of course, on the 2nd of November, Judith Lowe is teaching a 9-week Zoom course on the key principles of the generative citizen. I will send you all details of that if you haven't seen that. But I really want to build to build a movement of people who have got psychological skills, spiritual skills, are empowered in themselves, have negotiation skills, have good communication skills, who, a movement of people who have got all of these tools to sort of network with each other and see what it is and support each other, and in doing what we've been talking about today, which is going out and being a force in the world for good. So I will send you details about all of that. The environmental one, I think, is incredibly important, because the scale of what we're faced with, I think, is a part of why so many people aren't doing anything much about it. There's, you know, so I think really facing that. And the interesting thing is that people who become activists very often burn out because they haven't dealt with the feelings. So there's dealing with the feelings, there's staying resilient and resourceful and nourishing ourselves, but there's also taking action. So anyway, that will be the 9th of November, and you will get, you are already signed up for it because this is a 2-part workshop. So it's so great to have you here today. I really am delighted that you've come. And I'd like to just do what I often do at the end of these sessions, which is ask people for one word about how they're feeling right now. So I will start with Caroline. How are you feeling right now?
Sad.
Sad. Pass it on to someone.
Andrew. Andrew Reisner, sorry.
Peaceful. To the other Andrew.
Resilient.
Pass it on to someone, Andrew.
Oh, sorry, Marion, go and be that super power Emma Peel.
Determined. Julian.
I'm feeling firmer, and I'm incredibly excited because I'm just off to see Bob Dylan.
Pass it on to someone.
Oh, Lu Feng.
Li Wei, yeah.
Oh, Li Wei.
力量 power 力被
Good.
Pass it on.
Maggie.
I suppose I feel involved with life. Christina.
I feel hopeful and strong.
Right. I feel open-hearted and happy to have engaged with you all and what we're doing together. So thank you so much for coming. Oh, one last thing, which is I have, if you're interested in the article on the subject, I will put it into the chat. I'll put a link to it in the chat. So I've you know, it's just everything I've said in an article is in this link with some references as well back to the people who came up with the model. And it's really great to see you, and I hope to see you in on the 2nd of November if you want to do the generative citizen course, and also on the 9th of November when I will do, it's going to be called Generatively Empowered Earth Protectors. That's what I'm doing on the 9th of November. Take care, and great to see you.
Julian, will that be recorded?
Everything's recorded, yeah.
Thanks, Julian.
Great.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Julian.